Welcome back to another episode of the Meat Mafia podcast. If this is your first time joining us, we have one goal and one goal only, and that is that you, yes, you, listen to this podcast and get at least one valuable piece of information that inspires you to go radically change your health today. If this is your second, third, fourth, or 100th time listening to the Meat Mafia podcast, we are so grateful to have you, and we are so thankful for your continued support. Before we get going, if you would not mind going and following us on all of our platforms, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and of course, Twitter, we would greatly appreciate it. This just allows us to expand our reach, and your reviews, comments, and feedback give us more and more things to think about and improve the show with. Lastly, this is a user-supported podcast and newsletter, and we would not be able to do what we love doing without your generous support and the support from our sponsors. We take great pride in the relationships that we've built with our sponsors and truly believe that they are the best resources out there for better health. Your support and their support, and you supporting them, means the world to us. If you are enjoying the podcast and getting value out of it, please check us out on the Fountain app below, where you can support us by streaming us sats or sending us support via our Fountain Bitcoin wallet. Without further ado, here is a word from our sponsors. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by the Carnivore Bar. The Carnivore Bar is a veteran-owned, animal-based company focused on bringing you the highest quality pemmican product on the market. Pemmican is an ancient tradition practiced by American indigenous cultures, and it's focused on simple ingredients: beef, tallow, and salt. It's built for grab-and-go snacking, and it's a great sort of travel, hiking, or school lunch snack. And it's really built for those long-lasting days where you can just run on basically no fuel other than just simple fats. It's rich in saturated fats and provides everything you need to sustain long-lasting energy throughout the busy day. In my opinion, this is a product that is an absolute must, so go check it out in the link below. Also, check out our podcast with the founder, Philip Meese. He does an incredible job breaking down the mission and the passion behind the company. And I think if you're interested in animal-based nutrition, Philip will inspire you with his product. This episode of the podcast is also brought to you by Holy Cow Beef. Holy Cow Beef is regeneratively raised, grass-fed, grass-finished beef raised right here in Lubbock, Texas. Regeneratively raised, grass-fed, grass-finished beef is the gold standard of beef, and Ann and Weldon Warren have made it their lives' mission to provide incredibly high-quality beef to their local community and beyond. They have been raising their animals this way for decades. In fact, they were some of the most influential voices for getting grass-fed and grass-finished beef in Whole Foods back when Whole Foods was a startup grocery store. They were influential in setting the AGA standards, which is the American Grass-Fed Association, so you know they are doing things the right way, and on top of all of that, their beef tastes like butter. Grass-fed, grass-finished beef provides a superior omega-3 to omega-6 ratio than your typical beef, or in other words, it causes less inflammation in your body. So you are promoting a high protein, high fat diet with this amazingly high quality beef, and saturated fats are playing their critical role in benefiting your body through supporting hormonal functions and cellular functions. And if you're looking for the highest quality beef, look no further than Holy Cow Beef. Leave your butcher box, that Australian and New Zealand raised meat, in the cart and order from your friends Ann and Weldon Warren over at Holy Cow Beef. I almost forgot the most important part there. Ann and Weldon Warren also accept Bitcoin as payment, so go check them out at their website in the link below, and you can pay in Bitcoin or in cash if you're looking to save your Bitcoin. I don't know about you all, but I am all about rewriting the incentives when it comes to healthcare, and Crowd Health is doing just that. Crowd Health is essentially crowdfunding for healthcare with a small HSA component mixed in. Paying through the nose for health insurance you may never use, only to be turned away when you actually need it, is incredibly frustrating. Also, the exorbitant costs of health insurance has so many baked in premiums that when you compare settling your doctor's bills by paying in cash versus using insurance, the cost is astronomical. So crowdfunding allows you to settle your medical bills in cash and then get the funding you need from your group through Crowd Health. This is a great alternative to health insurance for people who are low risk, healthy people who just want peace of mind knowing that if anything actually did happen, they do have a pool of funds to pull from to cover their medical costs. The best part, my group is saving a portion of the monthly opt-in in Bitcoin, and the rest is in cash. So those savings are going towards actually preserving long-term value for my group through a vehicle like Bitcoin. We are really excited about this concept, and since the business model is predicated on an incentive-based healthcare, it is a great concept. For people with low risk, minimal healthcare costs, it is a no-brainer. Go check them out in the link below and use our promo code MAFIA for a discount on your first 6 months with Crowd Health. Scott, what's going on, man? Welcome to the Meat Mafia podcast. We are very excited to have you.
Thanks so much, guys. I really am grateful and appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, we're looking forward to this one. And we were saying before we hit record, we met in July at the Beef Initiative Colorado Summit out in Crawford at Rick Ranches. Just such an amazing 3 days. And part of the reason why that event was so good was the Sunday sermon that you were really able to lead. I think that was powerful for a lot of people that were either of faith or maybe not necessarily as faithful and kind of going on their journey. But we're excited about this because I think that that story is so powerful in regards to, your story with ranching, your story finding your faith. So I think as a starting point, man, if you'd be open to just sharing that story a little bit, that would be a great starting point.
Sure. So my name is Scott Hauck. I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri, but we currently reside and our home is in Mancos, Colorado. And it's been a very roundabout journey from St. Louis as a young child, now here as a man and a husband and a father in Mancos and a rancher. Really, I think the key theme of my journey has been one, and I think it's one that we're not only going through on the individual level, each one of us, but then on the macro level as a culture and as a civilization, this journey from separation to unity. And I, in my own way, that was really through the function of dealing with drug and alcohol addiction. So I was really struggled throughout my, I would say starting in my teen years, all the way up until I was about 27, really about 10 years there of serious drug and alcohol abuse that had really taken over my life. I was, in certain circles, they say once your life becomes unmanageable, that's how you know that you have a problem. And we can apply this to anything. We can apply it to drugs, alcohol. We can apply it to sugar. We can apply it to screen time. At any point, it doesn't have to necessarily be something that's overtly toxic for our body, but there's things that are toxic for us at every level of our being, spiritually, emotionally, physically. And so, but I certainly was down that physical path of really struggling and spiraling down with drug and alcohol abuse. Now, I didn't really comprehend at the time what was happening to me. It took me a long time to hit rock bottom, I would say, and come to the place of humility and understanding around that my use specifically around marijuana and alcohol was not the norm, right? That my life truly had become unmanageable. And it was one of those things like you have an inkling feeling, like kind of this subconscious tension, if you will, but it's not coming to the surface, right? It's more outside. Everything in my life is going wrong, and when you're in ranching, and this is where ranching and farming and working with the land and with animals comes in, it's a direct feedback mechanism to who we are as people. I fundamentally believe that. And so for example, if you have a tomato plant on your front porch and you don't water that tomato plant, it's going to die. And that is a direct result of your choice, of my choice, not watering my tomato plant. It died because of me. And so once we enter into this relationship with animals and with plants and with the land in general and creation in general, we are getting this feedback like, hey, step your game up constantly. and it's a never-ending process. We never get to the end of that road. But I was getting a lot of feedback from our ranch, from my wife, from my children, that, hey, husband, hey, dad, hey, rancher, you're not showing up the way you need to be. So you're missing the mark. I was an expert at hitting the bullseye of the wrong target. I was hitting the bullseye of the target of escaping from my from traumas and wounds from childhood. I was hitting the bullseye of running away from problems. I was hitting the bullseye of victimization and not taking full responsibility for myself. And instead of hitting the bullseye of fully owning who I am as a man, taking the reins of my life, taking responsibility for every single thing that happens in my life. Even if it's something that was necessarily out of my control, I'm still in control of my attitudes and my actions. And so as a result of that spiral downward at the end of that decade there, from when I was 27, I'm 31 now. When I was 27, I checked myself into a rehab program. My life had gotten so out of control. The ranch was completely out of control. And what's interesting, though, is that we can keep a veneer on our life. Like I've said in the past, that our Instagram, if you go back in our Instagram, it's the bomb from like when I was 27, right? Like it's the idyllic, pastoral, young family out on the landscape doing what many people dream of. But inside was this spiral of degradation and erosion that was happening inside me. And so that what was happening on the land was in no way sustainable because I was crumbling as a person. So when I was 27, checked myself into rehab. My family was so beautifully supportive. We actually had gone back to St. Louis for the holidays. And it was at that point where I was like, it just felt, everything had come to a culmination where this was the right time to do this. My wife's from St. Louis as well. And so she had family there that could support her. We had just our one daughter, River, who was about 18 months old at the time. And so it was everything, God had really brought everything together to where I was like, okay, I just left the ranch, and the ranch was pretty much, I'd left it essentially in shambles for the folks that were watching it, and like, and they did an amazing job kind of keeping everything running. But it came to the point where I was like, I think this is time to do this, with this love and support of my family, and with kind of the courage in myself to finally say, all right, it's time to try something new, because everything else was failing. I checked myself into a rehab facility, and it was during those 30 days of just kind of getting cleaned up that I started to really get back in touch with, not being concerned with necessarily the physical appearance of how I am to the world, of necessarily like the Instagram feed or the Twitter feed of how people see me, so to speak, but more so with who I am inside, what's going on with my own self-talk. How am I thinking about myself? And with that, in a direct relationship of who I am as a child of God. And so I had to come to the realization that, like I said earlier, take full responsibility for my attitudes and my actions. Those two things are always in our control. No one can take that from us. That is our greatest gift as humans, that we have the ability to, under any circumstances, and it was primarily the book Man's Search for Meaning and Viktor Frankl's story of going through the concentration camps, and him specifically sharing that the people who lost their spiritual will were the people who once they lost their spiritual will, they would die the next day. They were starving, but they had some sort of spiritual practice, whether it was their Christianity or their devout Judaism or whatever it was. They had a devout practice, and they had to keep that. And if they lost it, then the physical body went right after that. Mm-hmm. And so that's when I started to really go inward and think about this link between the spiritual and the physical. And what is more apt is the metaphysical and the physical. And how do I apply that to my own life? And so I kind of really started to return to, and I think this is when we're talking about regenerative agriculture, what is this all about? And we're talking about our diets. What are we supposed to be eating? How are we supposed to be living? What kind of food production system do we want to be supporting? It was like, well, we need to do that which works. That which works is what lasts. And that which lasts is what brings us into union with God. And so we really need to focus on being very humble and courageous in our approach to life. I need to be humble and courageous in my approach to life and be willing to accept the feedback that I'm getting from my wife, from my children, from my ranch, no matter how painful it is to my ego, no matter how difficult it may be to accept. That is the place where we have ultimate control. That's where our freedom actually is, right? Like, it doesn't come from a government, or it comes from God, and it's in that place of this soul and this body making our way through this physical reality. So at the conference, I talked essentially about is how can we use our physical experience as essentially the scientific method, or a test case, if you will, for how our souls are interacting with divine truth. Because I do fundamentally believe that our physical reality is a manifestation of divine law. There's no other reason for it. So that's kind of the gist of what I talked about on that Sunday. And as a Catholic and a Christian, I tried to keep it as general as possible, because everyone's at different places on that journey of coming to understand who we are, what we're doing here, why, and all these things. And that's kind of the point. We all get to go on that journey at our own pace. That's how things are made. So that's what I tried to talk about mostly, was we can use our life as a living example and a living experiment almost to find truth and beauty.
Equip's unflavored prime has one single ingredient derived directly from grass-fed beef protein. For purists like ourselves who try to only consume balanced, real sources of nutrition, this protein powder checks all the boxes. Go check them out in the link below and use our promo code in the description to get a discount.
It's such a deeply moving and powerful story that you have, Scott. And maybe before, I have so many questions I want to ask you, but like before we dive in, just kind of understanding the chronological order of like when you got on the farm initially to that point when, you turned 27, you started to realize, you were living your life and you were running into some problems and you need to make some serious changes. So like my question is like, when did you get on the farm originally and when did you kind of get into it? And then I have tons of questions that I want to ask you about your experience, because a lot of it spoke to me.
So my journey with agriculture or ranching started when I was about 16 or 17. My uncle had moved out of this. I grew up in suburban St. Louis. And so he moved out of the suburbs and got a place out in the country and just started raising sheep and goats, and just really early, thinking back, he was kind of an early adopter of many of these, what we call now regenerative practices. He was very much into Joel Salatin. That was one of his heroes. All the guys who were into kind of natural horsemanship and animal husbandry on a more traditional level of really honoring the animals and using the animals as a mirror into your own soul when you're doing stockmanship or anything. So I went out there because I loved the physical aspect of that work, right? I was an athlete in high school and I just loved sweating and working and using my body. And towards when you're doing this sort of work, there's always, you can accomplish something at the end of the day. So I enjoyed that. Like, you could look back and be like, we cleared that whole path and made a new road through the woods. We set up that fence. We fed all these animals, that's very deliberate in that way. And so I really loved that. And I was hooked from then on. I have a memory of, he asked me to we were working some sheep and he asked me to just move a group of ewes from one pen to the other. It was like maybe 20 yards, right? And so it's like from a corner of one pen to a gate and then into another pen. And that was a moment that will never leave me. It was looking back now, is very much God kind of tapping me on the shoulder saying, this is kind of where I need you to, the path I need you to go down, because it just, there's always a lead you, and you don't necessarily have to move all the animals. If you move her, then the rest of them will move. For whatever reason, my intuition, I just found her immediately, moved her without really moving my body at all. Just more, I maybe took 2 total steps. It was more just energetically like, hey, we're going to this we're going to this gate. And I maybe moved my body a little bit to the left and she passed off to my right. And then they were all through the gate. And I was like, what just happened? I didn't know that it was one of the first experience of getting out of my body, really, in a sense, right? As a young man. And so I was hooked. So I just wanted to do anything regards with the rural lifestyle from then on. Hunting, fishing, just being out in nature, working with animals, whatever. And so that took us from then on. But I did go to university at Regis University in Denver, and obviously the opposite of a rural landscape. So I kind of scratched that itch by getting into the urban agriculture movement. And my wife and I, as fate would have it, got into that at the exact same time. We both went to the same college. We're from St. Louis, didn't know each other in St. Louis, but met in college. And we both got into urban agriculture at the same time. And at that time in Denver, there was kind of an upstart urban ag movement. And it was really fun to be a part of that. And there was just gardens getting put in all over the city. So there's a lot of opportunity to just cut our teeth in more just fruits and vegetables production. And just thinking about soil, really, because you really have to think about building soil from scratch at that point, too. So it was really a good experience there. And after that, my wife and I went to Peru and worked on a farm there. And then we went to Wisconsin and worked on a farm there called New Forest Farm, which was started by a man named Mark Shepard. He wrote a book called Restoration Agriculture, and that was very formative, 8 months for us. And after Wisconsin, we moved down here to Mancos. Before we went to Wisconsin, we knew we wanted to raise our family in Colorado, and we just found this. It's a terrible little valley. Nobody ever come visit it ever because you would never want to live here. It's horrible. We found this place and we were like, this is where we want to be. And so, and I don't really know why we didn't know anyone. There's 2 feet of snow on the ground, but it was just another thing we felt called to be here. And so, after living in Southwest Wisconsin, we came down here and started up our current operation, Sacred Song Farm.
Scott, how has your experience as a rancher changed since kind of finding your faith and being a man and a father that really takes responsibility of your own life versus maybe the younger version of yourself that was battling issues with addiction and maybe not really being as intentional with your choices?
Really great question. I've been reflecting on this a lot, Brett. I have much more of artistic tendencies. I don't know. I haven't taken any personality tests, but I'm definitely much more of an artist than I am like an engineer. And that kind of goes along with this entrepreneurial spirit. Just get her done, make it happen, whatever it takes, right? I'm just gonna, no matter whatever it takes. And a lot of my family they'd come down here and visit, and they're like, how are you getting all this done? This is crazy. Because it was crazy. The way things were set up was not efficient or effective. But I was just brute forcing my way through it with just like kind of this inner will. But that can't last, right? Like there's this relationship between regenerative agriculture and sustainable agriculture. And I kind of feel an ag economist from the University of Missouri talks about regenerative agriculture is great, but is it sustainable? And all these words are getting co-opted and greenwashed. But it's like, if we're really thinking about the essence and the truth of them, is it sustainable? And regenerative agriculture being sustainable comes down to people who, in their own inner landscape, have a regenerative and renewing spiritual force and spiritual essence, right? And a practice that does that. So long story short, I have gotten much more rigorous in kind of thinking more like an engineer. And I've really had to teach myself that. And I'm still in the early stages of that. It's very difficult for me to be disciplined about planning, about design, about thinking through problems and creating backup plans if something goes wrong, like looking for the failure points in any sort of design or any sort of daily activities and saying, where can this go wrong? Where can that go wrong? And what will I do if that happens, right? And so I used to just wake up and just start my day and just start doing stuff. And I would say, as a result of my other responsibilities of being a husband and father actually coming before the ranch, because if I can't do that well, all this ranching stuff is pointless. Because if I can't be a good father and husband and my kids grow up in a family that's in strife and the ranch is like this thing that always took priority, they're not going to want to have anything to do with it. And that kind of defeats the whole purpose. And succession is a huge issue in ranching because of this, because it's not paying well. And it's difficult for kids to see, well, I don't want to just live to do this work. I want to work so I can have a good quality of life. Right. And so getting more disciplined in my time management, getting more disciplined in my planning process, and getting more disciplined in execution is something I'm still very much in the early stages of. If you came here, you'd be like, this guy's working on this. Doesn't look like it, but I really am getting much more intentional about how I think about it in my mind. That helps me is just like, how would an engineer think about this? How would someone who's like very precise in their activities and in their execution go about these processes?
Mm-hmm. You had this great analogy when you were first telling your story about watering the tomato plants, and if you ignore it, it won't grow. And I think it's it's a great parallel to like certain characteristics in life, and certain principles in life that you need to just be mindful of and make sure that you water. Are there any things that you kind of set as like your foundational building blocks that you tend to water as a man of faith, or just like even just in general, like outside of your faith? Just what are those like key things that you're really trying to like anchor yourself in on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, it starts with my spiritual life, and which is made physical. Every morning and night I hit my knees and I thank God for the day. I ask God to take my will from me, thy will be done. And sometimes it's just a minute. Sometimes it's 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Sometimes it's an hour. I don't really think about it with regards to time frame, but more so getting the interface of my spirit and my body in that place of surrender to God's will for me. It has to start there. And that almost always means, like I said, with regards to my priorities of putting my husbandhood and my fatherhood before, no matter how important and sacred this work of ranching is, it still comes after those duties and those gifts. And so keeping those things in the right order, I would say, Harry, is my focus day to day. And then like the ranch stuff, I'm like thinking about, okay, how do I do this as efficiently with the time that I have? But I think it's really important if we're going to acknowledge that we're spiritual beings making our way through this physical reality, and that the beauty of this is actually the interface of the two, the manifestation of the physical as a result of the metaphysical. If we're going to be honest about that, then we have to tend to that which is unseen before we tend to that which is seen, right? So in agriculture, to use a physical analogy, we think the most important thing we're realizing now is we need to think about our soil. Well, we actually can't see what's going on in the soil. It's a mysterious, hidden world we can only see under a microscope. So 99.999% of my time as a rancher, I'm managing something I don't see. And that's kind of a mysterious thing. And it's the same way on the micro level with me as an individual. I'm managing that which I don't see so I can have, like you said, a firm foundation to then make my way through each day. And I'm certainly not perfect and I make plenty of mistakes, but it's like to attempt to make my way through each day with as little anxiety, with as little fear, and with as much joy and positivity and humility as I can. And just set that tone for my family and then for the ranch. So, yeah.
So I think one of the things that you mentioned a few times is just this concept of like really taking responsibility over your own life as a man, as a father, which we relate to so strongly. I think that's probably part of the reason why the modern man is so sick and depressed, is that there's like this refusal to take responsibility, which I'd love to talk to you about. But I'm just curious, for you, and this might be a little bit of a chicken or the egg type thing, but was it finding your faith that led to you taking responsibility, or was it taking responsibility that led to you kind of like finding your faith?
That is it's so beautiful. And I just refer to that as like kind of the great mystery, because this is like, now we're getting to the level of like, how does God or creator, or however you want to refer to it, is fine with me, but just recognizing that we all fall under this hierarchy of of divinity, the divine essence of all things, being the creative power and manifestation of what we see and feel and experience and know. And it is the chicken or the egg, because I think, because how can I know if it was God working in my life that then gave me the courage to take responsibility, or was it the courage and me having the courage to step through that door that opened my eyes to the reality? I do think that choice and freedom to choose is kind of the I hate to use it, so I'm not gonna. It is the, how do I say this? It is the fabric. It's the threads of the fabric of reality, right? So it's the tiny pieces that make up the whole picture, right? Nothing. That's kind of the reason we're here, I think, is to have the freedom to move through and to choose goodness or evil, right? Without that, we're either in a heavenly realm or we're in a hellish realm. This realm seems very much to me to be about how do we discover who we can be, who we should be, how ought we to live. And so because of that, I think there is an impotence. If I was going to have to choose, I think there is an impotence put on choice, right? Put on, have the courage to make the choice to take responsibility for yourself. And it's very much in doing that, then, so God molded me into the man who in that moment was then ready to take the leap, right? And I could have said no. At any point, we can say no to God's will for us in our life, right? We can say no to how we ought to live, even if we know we should be living a certain way, and we can say no to it all the time. I've said no to it with regards to my diet for years, you know? And so I think there is an impotence put on choice, and because that's kind of that's the pattern that carries us through each moment, is saying, okay, I have the courage to choose now, whether it's to choose to be humble in the face of criticism, or whether it's to choose to be brave and trying something I've never done before, or whether it's to choose to be disciplined and being very rigorous with my implementation and execution of our ranch plans and the business plans and all these things. I think there is an impotence put on choice, because that seems to kind of be the underlying, as Will Harris says, that's kind of the way the shit works. And so it's like, I think we put our focus on that and we'll be all right.
Did your perception of time change over the course of you kind of transforming as a man? And what I mean by that is, it seems like a lot of the choices that you were making when you were struggling were really centered around short-term thinking. But now you mentioned in your initial story, it's like you kind of took this like eternal view on your life and how you need to think about, restoring the land, your own internal restoration. So like, was there a shift there for you in terms of your thinking on how you need to view your time here that you have, like, on the land that you're working on and just everything that you're doing?
Absolutely. My wife is so wise. And she always says, what we do ripples throughout eternity, because we are these energetic beings that we're leaving a pattern. We're leaving a track in the field of consciousness, quite literally, with who we are, how we behave. And there's a great quote from one of my early mentors, and these were the seeds that God was planting in me. But one of my early mentors, it was only through books, I never met him, but his name's Dr. David Hawkins. And the quote he's most well known for is, "We change the world not by what we say or do, but as a consequence of who we become." So what's interesting there is that it's not even about what you do necessarily. Like, you could be a hot dog vendor, right? But if you are there with grace and humility and joy and respect and attunement to your craft, that's saintly, right? That it truly, everyone who comes to you leaves with a smile, right? Like, it could be something that even from a regenerative agriculture perspective, we're like, oh, that's horrible. We shouldn't be doing that. It's like, if the person is doing it in a way that is leaving all who come across their path better, well, that's almost as good as it gets, right? And so I would say my perspective on time is really, it's slowed down in the sense of I've become a more attuned to the moment. I've become a more attuned to, and in the moment through that hierarchy of priorities. So what matters? What's most important? So for example, if the cattle are out and I'm looking out and the cattle aren't where they're supposed to be, a deer knocked the fence down or something, and the cattle I see them and it's like, they're not supposed to be there. And there's 2 children screaming and crying. There's a diaper that needs to be changed. And my wife is trying to cook everybody breakfast. I don't just put my hat on and just go outside, right? It's like the cattle can wait. And so that's gotten me attuned to the moment. And inside, the rancher in me is like, oh, God, gotta go, gotta do something, But I'm that anxiety and that experience, that give and take, that push and pull energetically is like, this is where you're supposed to be. Handle this first. Attune to the home first, and then go out and then attune to the ranch. And so it's slowed down. But then I would also say, Harry, having children, it's like all these little moments that are so beautiful and all that just keep stacking on top of each other, and the moments that are terrible and make you angry, like everything that just stacks on top of each other. Time just seems to be flying faster than ever. So it's a total mystery and dichotomy. It's one of those kind of like is and is not Eastern paradoxes, right? I don't understand it. But I would say day to day, I'm trying to go slower, and time around me seems to be moving faster.
It's so good. I think to that point, I was just curious, are there any mental models or just approaches that you have for your life and your mindset that you either wish that you had in your 20s, or just think that that could be important for just men in their 20s to understand now? Maybe we've gotten away from some of these things. I'm just curious.
Yeah. If I could talk to myself now as the 20-year-old, if I could go back and see 20-year-old Scott at Regis University there, thinking I had it all figured out, had all the answers. I would tell him to start doing the difficult thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what gets us out of our comfort zone. That's what is fundamentally, I'd say, the Christian worldview. That's the story of the Bible. Pick up your cross. Do that which is difficult. Surrender your ego. Surrender that which you think you are towards the higher nature of who God is calling you to be. And that comes through just day to day, most often doing the difficult thing. I'm not very good at that. I'm still getting better at it every day. But if I could offer him one thing, it'd be like, get out of your comfort zone. Quit doing all the easy stuff. Push yourself. And that looks different for everyone, but that's what I would tell him, because I think that's how we become the most well-rounded, the most finely tuned, the most intentionally sculpted versions of ourselves. And so, that's what I'd tell him. Do the difficult thing.
Yeah. And I know that, you've just had your own amazing experience with the carnivore diet and really playing around with the foods that you're putting into your body and using more animal protein and saturated fat. Do you think that your willingness to experiment with carnivore is kind of an extension of pushing yourself to do the difficult thing?
Definitely. Sugar is the first addiction. I fully believe that. And there's a reason that the sugar lobby exists. You guys know much more about the history of that than I do, but it's quite obvious that that is at least the modern, those are the modern chains of our modern civilization, as sugar, and keeping us in that kind of a dopamine state. Slow drip, baby. And so it was not being afraid to know what my life would look like after that, because some of my earliest memories are of waking up before everyone else in my family, going downstairs, having this own little secret, right? I had my own little secret. Like and I'm 5 or 6 years old, going downstairs on a Saturday morning or during the summertime, each morning, and grabbing the ice cream out of the fridge and secretly eating the ice cream, hearing my mom walk down the halls and watching TV before anybody else got up. And then hearing my mom walk down the hall, right? And running back and putting the ice cream back in the fridge. And then just going back and watching TV. So like for me, sugar and screens are very much like the bottom of my addictions for sure. And I'm still dealing with the screen one. I very much have AD, whatever, who cares what it is. I'm a very curious person. I'm always exploring new ideas, and this technology is beautiful for that, and it's a curse for that, right? And it gets me out of the present moment, which I think is so critical, and it's the foundation of everything, like I talked about earlier. So having the courage to move through the fear of what would my life be like without sugar, who would I become, what would happen, was really difficult for me. And I would say this time around, what is different about this time around, Brett, is that I had a slip disc in my back. Mm-hmm. Okay. And this happened, I don't know, last year sometime. I'm not exactly sure. And I was, if you guys have ever had that, or anyone who's had that knows, you can't get up off the floor. I couldn't get up. And so I'm just on the floor. And the first thought that went through my mind, because I'm so dramatic like this, was, okay, I'm paralyzed. This is my life now. I have to come to accept this. Okay, like accept that this is how are you gonna live now? But I was like, and I was crawling. I was just army crawling, and I was kind of, and if I would move my legs or my back or my hips really at all, it was excruciating pain. So I was like, and I couldn't help but do that a little bit while I was army crawling. And so I'm groaning a little bit. My wife could hear me. She comes down. My wife has to help I had blown up at that time weight wise. I've always struggled with my weight. I can put it on fast and it can come off fast too. So it's just always been a thing for me. And I'm realizing mostly now it's probably mostly inflammation. And I am not a nutritionist. I know nothing about any of that stuff, really, like the actual science of it, the mechanisms of how any of that works. And that I humbly admit that is way above my pay grade. But I'd done keto a couple times in the past, and I felt very good. But I would always come off it. It would just be like a temporary thing. And I think what has been different now has been I've been eating to satiety. So like if I need to eat 2-3 pounds of ground beef, and if I want to put a little sour cream on there for flavor, I don't beat myself up about it. Or even a little splash of hot sauce for flavor. Like I do it because I know like the cost of having 7 tacos with tortillas is way worse, and all the lettuce and all the toppings and the nightshades too. I think I have a sensitivity to that. I'm not 100% sure, because when you're eliminating stuff, you don't know what is and isn't. So I don't know really. But like, I know that I feel better than I ever have in my life. And kind of that practice and that discipline of like, no, eat till you're full has really helped me this time around with cravings. So what got me in the past was that sugar craving I never really got it KO'd, so to speak. And about a month in now and eating to satiety, like I'm sitting next to a plate of Christmas cookies that my daughters and my wife made yesterday, and I helped them make. I made the frosting for them, And it's like and maybe on Christmas Day I may have one, like, because who cares, just for the joy. Like on Thanksgiving, I had Thanksgiving dinner. I'm not going to be. My family is very much about food, and they will accommodate me to a point. But if I was that guy who didn't, then I wouldn't want myself. It's like I'm going to have Thanksgiving dinner. Yeah. And if I feel a little bit crappy the next day, which I didn't, I was kind of surprised. So maybe like, I don't know. But I also didn't fall off the wagon the next day either. I fasted the whole next day and kind of got back disciplined. But anyways, I feel like I've kind of more KO'd those, or at least it's down for the count so far. It's always that trying to rear its ugly head. And there are days where I do have crazy sugar cravings, but that's what's been different this time around, that I've been kind of willing to be more disciplined about it.
Yeah, the mechanism of like choosing satiety over these cravings is something that like kind of once the genie's out of the bottle and you really are working towards being satiated instead of just scratching an itch that you know is going to come back 5 minutes later, it's like it changes the game in terms of just being consistent. And I almost feel like I can really relate to what you're saying in regards to, you know, being more consistent with it and not even really having to think twice about it. Like you're just really in control, which I think a lot of people probably don't feel like they're in control of their dietary habits. But when you do start thinking along these lines of satiety, as opposed to like, you know, the yo-yo roller coaster of being addicted to carbs, yeah, you do notice that shift.
Absolutely. And I think that idea of feeling out of control is so scary. That's like chaos. That's like the chaos of hell. It's like the worst thing. It's like, I don't know what's going on. I feel like I'm not in control of my life and things are just happening to me. And I think, number one, once we start to take responsibility for ourselves, we realize that that's BS and I'm fully in control. And there's ways that I can treat myself physically and spiritually in a way that manifests total responsibility. And I think that the next step, and this is something I did want to get across here, the next step is realizing that all civilization is just a quadrillion choices of 8 billion people every day, right? That's all it is. And it's so, and we act as if like civilization is this behemoth that is like crushing us and it's like we can't escape it. It's like, no, it's just made up of all of us making choices. And if we all took responsibility for our life, like, so if we all took responsibility for our health and we realized that we probably should be eating more meat, not less, and the meat we should be eating should be from perennial ranch ecosystems that are renewing soil, that are building water tables, that are increasing biodiversity, that are raising more animals each year, not less, right? If we got to that point where we're thinking that way, we have a fundamentally different civilization, right? Not one that is about relying on technology and trying to dominate nature and trying, because that's what, and I am in no way against farming. I'm a farmer. I plant seeds. So I'm in no way against farming. But I think it's this issue of a spectrum. And when you become so dependent on agriculture, annual agriculture that relies on you to plant something every year, you're fundamentally reliant on technology. We actually become the tools of the technology to just implement more technology, right? Like similar to how Michael Pollan, I don't know if it's in Botany of Desire or in Omnivore's Dilemma, but where he says like, corn is genetically modifying us to plant more corn, right? It's like winning this arms race, right? And technology is doing that to us too, right? Like, and I think it's very curious, not to get too biblical, but it's very curious that on the back of these phones, and I have one, so I'm a hypocrite, right? I have one right here. I'm talking on one. But it's very curious. I think we need to recognize the deep, manifested and powerful and real symbolism of a once bitten apple. Adam and Eve in the garden, once bitten apple. That's all you need to say, right? So it's like we need to be very aware that we are the masters of technology, and we shouldn't lean on it at every turn just because it's cool or just because it makes life more efficient, right? I think that this is the problem we're getting into, is that as a people with our food production system and as consumers of food, we are relying too heavily on technology. And as a result, we're becoming slaves to essentially a process of technological innovation and agricultural innovation that we now see is making us fatter, sicker, killing us. I mean, the nation with the best technology for agriculture is the nation that has the most chronic illness. And food is the direct manifestation of who we are as a people and how we relate with God's creation, what we eat. That's like the interface, right? How we think about ourselves is going to be a direct manifestation of what we put into our bodies, and that's the feedback loop. So if we turn that on its head and we actually focus on perennial systems that are fundamentally biological, like you can run an entire beef production system on no diesel fuel. Like we could all imagine, and then we could all imagine how that could happen quite easily, right? Or very, 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 very little diesel fuel to where the entire system is orders of magnitude carbon negative, sequestering orders of magnitude of carbon. And so I think we have this at every level. It's like, no, we need to take control of ourselves as consumers, right? And that's what people, I think, and this is what I try to tell our customers, you don't understand what you're doing. It is an incredibly profound and revolutionary act to support a ranch that is striving to do what we strive to do. You're actually physically creating a world that is giving more life to an untold amount of beings. And that's just our little ranch, right? Because in a handful of healthy soil, there's more organisms than there are people on the planet, right? So, and when we till that soil up, and this isn't to bash vegans, this is just an ecological fact. When we till that soil, we expose all those organisms, which are living, they're alive. Should we not take their life as sacred as anything else in creation? They are living, breathing organisms upon which all of us depend. When we turn that soil over, they oxidize. That's why if you have a perennial pasture and you till the soil up, you do get a flush of crops for a couple years because it's all the nutrients being released from their physical bodies into the soil. And so we can't think about this myopically with regards to what are we in control of? Well, I can, it's like, no. As a consumer, you are in control of so much more than you even realize. Not only your own physical health, you're in control of creating an ecological reality. You're in control of creating a cultural reality of who we are as a people, what we do, and how we relate to one another and to the planet. And so I really want to empower people to say, like, in taking responsibility for your health, how you source that food, it has profound impacts beyond anything that I could even imagine, that any of us could imagine, but the ripple effects are enormous. And so let's lean into that and like really take responsibility for that and say, like, hey, this is how we need to be sourcing our food, is from farms and ranches that are thinking this way, that are thinking from a fundamentally abundant, fundamentally regenerative, fundamentally, I don't know how else to say it, deeply sacred paradigm.
Yeah. It's such an amazing point. And I actually think it's lost on a lot of people when you said it perfectly, speaking in the terms of like kind of becoming a co-creator of life, and thinking about it in terms of the life that's in the soil, not just, the plant that might be growing there, or like the animal that you can see, that's living off the plant. It's really much more than that. And I think when you start to speak to people about dietary patterns and habits and which ones are the most humane, most people see like animal agriculture as something that's taking life, but it's actually, there's a lot more to it. And you spoke to that a little bit, but it's really amazing to think about it in that terms of like, there's trillions of organisms that are living in the soil that we don't even acknowledge, that are fundamental to our microbiome and our existence on this planet. So, and animals are the keystone of all that, which is amazing.
That's it. It really is it, Harry. I mean, it's actually quite simple. We don't need to make it so complex. We really just need to keep things as simple as possible. And there is no more simple perennial food production system than ruminants grazing. The only ingredients is sunlight, soil, forage, and water. And that and ruminant agriculture, if you even want to call it agriculture, I think it even goes deeper than that. It's kind of a pattern that, if you ask me, and if you think, so a little bit of a tangent, but I'm going to come back around to this. So in ecology, we talk about ecological succession. So if you start with a patch of pavement, eventually the weeds are going to come in. They're going to break that pavement up. These are the pioneer species. They can live on pavement. They're going to sprout anywhere. They're going to come up. They're going to break all that up. And as they grow, then they all get laid down, eaten, mowed, whatever. Then the grasses start to come in, and then the shrubs start to come in. And you kind of have this cascade up towards old growth forest, right? And everyone in ecology says, well, that's the what they call, that's the climax ecosystem, is old growth forest. And I don't know, and this actually comes from a guy, I can't take full credit for this idea, but I think it's true. I don't know if that's actually true. Because if we look at the history, the ecological timeline, thinking chronologically of what the planet has been building to, whether you think the planet's 6,000 years old or whatever, 6 billion, I don't know, then I don't really care. But if you look at the ecological steps of the planet, the actual pinnacle wasn't old growth forests. There was old growth forests for hundreds of millions of years, but the pinnacle coming into the last ice ages, that led to us creating the ecological conditions for us to get these fatty brains that could actually be given the gift of consciousness, is actually an ecosystem that is grassland with some trees interspersed, some more like a savanna, and billions of ruminant animals. That's where mycelium developed most readily, right? That's where this interface of soil and plant and grass, which is a miracle, and the relationship between mycelium and soil and grass, and then ruminant animals and grass, which is also a miracle, that which then gives rise to a conscious human species. That actually, to me, that's the youngest ecosystem when you think about Earth history. So that actually, to me, we are a very young species. That actually, to me, is the pinnacle, right? Is this way, is ruminant animals moving across the landscape, building soil, is the pinnacle of ecology. And so that's just to bring it back around to, we are, we're immersed in this, and we need to kind of get real about it, right? We just need to be honest with ourselves and say, look, this works. This has worked. It seems to be true because it's worked for so long. So let's kind of get out of our own way and return to something that's more true. And as a rancher, I know I'm very biased, but I can't help but see the essential truth of humans managing ruminants as the foundation of a food production system, and thus the foundation of a civilization. I can't get away from that. That idea is just like, it's just anchored in me. Yeah. It seems to be the way that we're supposed to be doing this, and there's a lot of lessons we're getting taught as a result of our path down this technological innovation. Because if you have agriculture where you have to plant something every year, even if you're planting with a stick, some technocrat can come from the corner, buy up all the sticks, and then control the stick market, right? And so like we're chained up to these things that are outside of our control. But if we are fundamentally tied to biological processes, that's the essence of the story. That's the bottom. And so that, I think we really just need to focus our energy on what's true. And that seems to be true to me.
Yeah. And Scott, I do think that even if there is bias, it's only coming from the fact that you have such a unique perspective to food, to nutrition, to death, to life, to the understanding of the land that probably over 99% of people don't have when they just pick up their food from the grocery store, if you even want to call it food, right? I think there's a good argument to make that eating products in the inner aisle of the grocery store isn't food. But I think one of the strongest things that we've taken from this conversation, for whatever reason, as a society, we underestimate the power of taking control of the small domain that you have, like you mentioned, starting with the food that you're choosing to put into your body, the way that you purchase it from a rancher, feeding your family, just everything that could come from that. It's so easy to get focused on these macro level problems, but we understate what we can actually do. And I think something that really drives the ethos of this show is viewing the foods that we put into our body really as holistic assets. So like with you being a husband, father, rancher, it's like, what is the cost of you having more energy to be able to go out to the ranch and put in a couple extra hours of work, or play with your 3 kids, or like be a better husband and go out to a date with your wife? It's like, these are literally priceless investments, that are all coming from and stemming from the food that you're choosing to put into your system. So it's like, it's easy to be an outside, almost like an armchair quarterback, and be like, why are you guys so serious about the food you're putting in your system? But you understand the incredible benefits of choosing to nourish your body with the right foods.
Well, we have to approach, especially if we're going to be the greatest heroes in this world, are men and women who love one another in a marriage, are men and women who raise their children as honestly and with as much integrity as they can, and who have any sort of career, I don't care what it is, to provide a life that is as comfortable as they can make it, right? Those are the heroes, right? And it's vast majority of people are that, right? And we need to realize that we can be even better at that. I didn't realize for myself, when I slipped that disc in my back and I was on the floor, I was like, this can't happen. This is no longer an option. I have, my wife was she pregnant with our third child? I'm not sure if she was pregnant, but it was like, I have 2 young children. My livelihood depends on me being able to get up and move my body. Like, this is not an option. And so it took me a year of seeds getting planted, and it was actually meeting you guys and hearing your story, listening to more of your podcasts, and just being inspired because you guys carry yourselves in this way. I want to give you that feedback. Like, this isn't to pat you on the back or like blow smoke. It's like just, and people who know you and have been around you, you guys carry yourselves in a way where you do live this way. It's like, I'm responsible for myself as a man, and me taking responsibility of myself will manifest in how I feel, look physically, and how I feel and look internally, right? Those two things are one, and it's a result of my choices and my mindset. And so I came to the point where it was like, I have to almost think of myself as like an athlete. I have to start taking as meticulous care of myself as an athlete would, because I'm expending an immense amount of energy every day. I can't be tired at the end of the day, because the end of the day is the only time my wife and I get to really hang out, right? And I would have these sugar crashes, like these blood sugar crashes that were epic, man. It was like, I probably am pre-diabetic, right? Like, it was so bad. Like, where I would just she'd be talking to me, I'd just fall asleep, right? It's like, that's not normal. Yeah. Why was and that's not good for my marriage, it's horrible. And so it's like, I need to take the difficult feedback of like, that's hurting her, and it's a result of how I'm treating myself, right? And that's painful to the ego, but it's nourishing to the soul, right? And so it's like, I had to get real with myself about that. And then, so over the last month, 6 weeks, I don't know how long it's been of eating this way, it's been more of like an integration, right? Because I kind of came down this path from more of being like really internally focused and very reflective and discerning on my inner landscape, and just like as that type of person, and through prayer. And it's like, okay, how do I make that real, and how am I treating myself as a physical being, right? And manifest that sort of spiritual fitness in my physical fitness. And so it's about integration, and wounds get healed when we integrate. It's just like we're patching up the fabric of being, and things are becoming whole. And so that's been the greatest gift to me, Harry, of eating this way. Has been like, it feels I'm becoming more of myself, because I do have more energy to play with my kids. I have more energy to do the ranch work. And not only more energy, but this is a mystery to me. Maybe you guys know more about this, but I don't understand why, because I've always had a prayer life, but I would still struggle, or at least for a few years now, I've had a very devout prayer life, but I still would struggle with these like emotional outbursts, right? But I was really like, what? I'm not. So I think it's like a chicken or the egg thing. I think actually we can't unlock the deep, profound spiritual knowing without unlocking a deep, profound physical knowing as well, right? Like, those two things are inextricably linked. And so you guys actually were big inspiration in others, but have been a big inspiration to me to be like, dude, take full ownership of yourself and see what happens. Like, just try it and see what happens. And the results I've been calmer, I've had more energy, and I just feel better. So
that's so awesome to hear. and I think what you're saying is so true, where it's like you kind of tap into this like better or best version of yourself in like, one area, and then you start to apply it to other areas. And where we, love to speak about it in this foundational world of just nutrition, it's like there's so much that is, I just think people have so much to offer the world. And by treating yourself as best as possible and trying to make yourself as healthy as possible, it's actually this massively selfless act where you're then able to go do all the amazing things that and present your gifts to the world, because everyone is gifted. Everyone has some sort of genius in them. And I think you only unlock that when you're able to kind of free up all the things that are weighing on you. And I think like for a lot of people, their health is something that they're constantly like battling with. So if you can find the avenues to go down that really unlock that like freeing feeling of like, okay, I don't even really need to think about this, and put too much energy into this. I just eat these certain foods. They give me the energy I need. And I'm not on that constant energy roller coaster of eating carbs. And it's amazing. You mentioned the spiritual aspect of it. It's like, it just kind of unlocks that like steady state energy where you're not, I think that's what it is for me. I don't no science to back it up, but it's, and I think it is probably a lot related to like the blood sugar swings that you were speaking to, but it's like when you are operating in a much more static homeostatic state or consistent baseline, you're able to be more spiritual probably.
Well, you're just able to, I think, witness what's going on, right? Like when we slow things down and we're not doing this in our bodies, and that's a result of blood sugar swings, we're actually able to witness things, right? And I showed that image of our ranch, which has the swales on contour, which are designed, this was at the Beef Initiative conference, which are designed to slow the water down. And I equated that to what's going on with our consciousness. If we slow our consciousness down and our own self-talk and the words which make up our consciousness, we slow all that down. Like the word is the spiritual equivalent to water on the landscape. Word in our consciousness is what is the flowing life force of who we are. We don't have anything outside of our language with regards to our consciousness. And so the flowing life force on the landscape is water. So if we slow that down, we can actually create a much more regenerative system. The water gets infiltrated. It can slowly penetrate through the soil pores. It can therefore be utilized because all those soil microorganisms I was talking about, they're actually aquatic. They're subaquatic. They live on thin films of water. So it's actually a subaquatic ecosystem under there. So water drives the whole deal. Words drive the whole deal in our consciousness. And I'm in an erosive place when my body is having this huge burst of energy and then a huge crash, huge burst and a huge crash. I can't get ahead of that. I can't slow down. I can't just use willpower to just slow that down, or I'm not strong enough to, right? I needed to integrate these two things and actually tap into the truth of how does my body function. And then that allow me to actually be in a more calm, steady state with regards to my consciousness. And then I can show up better for the people that matter in my life and the work that matters. And so it's really important that, and I don't know how far to take this, but I think this is an idea that I'm exploring, okay? And I want to explore it with you guys. I think there's something to be said, and get back to this idea with regards to biological food production systems and technological food production systems. Biological ones that are fundamentally perennial based on ruminants, technological ones that are fundamentally annual and based off of plants and us eating plants. I think there's kind of and I don't know this, so I'm just exploring it. And this isn't to bash people, because I was vegan for years, because the modern animal agriculture system is abhorrent. Like CAFOs and feed, and they're abhorrent. That's one of the worst things. And a confinement hog facility, we should not be doing that. We can do it better. Like we just can do it better. And this isn't to bash the individuals. Like the individual farmers and ranchers who are doing things that way, I don't bash them. at all. Like we have a saying in Catholicism, it's like, hate the sin, not the sinner, right? It's like, it's the system that's broken, not the people. The people aren't broken. They're just people doing the best they can, right? So I don't bash them. It's like, but with annual, if our entire culture, our food production system is based off of annual agriculture, that's fundamentally anxiety, and warfare is at the bottom of that sort of food production, right? I'm going to war with nature, and I'm fundamentally anxious because if I don't get the rain, I don't have the soil moisture to bring the crop up, right? It's like that underlying energetic field is underneath that sort of agriculture, and it's like, let's look at that. And when I was eating that way, I was a more anxious person. I was more likely to do war with people ideologically. I wasn't looking for understanding. I was constantly trying to shove my ideology down their throat and get them to think the way that I thought. And it's like, at least for me, and it's a spectrum. There's people all over the spectrum. But as a general rule, I haven't seen that as much in people who are eating more animal-based or saying like, let's eat more meat. They're saying, this helps me. It's helped other people I know. Just give it a try. And if not, that's cool too. It's like, I'm not gonna try to force you to do anything. Like I haven't seen any yet. I haven't seen any people who are getting after or trying to promote an animal-based diet, going and like throwing paint on Rembrandts and like supergluing themselves to stuff, right? Like I haven't seen that yet. And until we see that, it makes me think like there's something going on as a result of the energetic field that's left because of the food production system, and then the way we eat the fruits of that food production system that leave us feeling in a way that's more anxious and likely to do war with each other. And so I just want to seek understanding and try to understand what's going on. And so I think we need to just focus on what we can control and share what's worked for us. And that's what you guys have done. And that's why I really respect you guys so much, because you don't come at it like, you need to do this, you need to do that. It's like, this is what's worked for us. We see this working for other people. Let's share that information and let people make their own choices, because that's actually true. That's the true way to go about teaching and learning.
Yeah, it means a lot for you to say that too. And I don't say that lightly, just because, we respect you a tremendous amount. And that's really all we're trying to go for at the show is, we're not experts. We're just enthusiasts that have had our own anecdotal experiences and understand what it feels like to have anxiety, or maybe not have the ideal weight, or have a stomach that's super inflamed. You can't control the ability to go to the bathroom. And then you start to play around with the food you put into your system. And I think something that you would mention is an amazing goal for 24 hours is to like minimize anxiety and approach things from like love and abundance and confidence. And I think the three of us and a lot of people that are probably listening to the show understand what can happen and how you can approach your life when you really nourish yourself with the right foods. So I don't think I could think of a better place to really put a bow on this conversation. So we just really appreciate your mindset and the work that you're doing, Scott, and, would love to have you on for a part 2, and just incredibly grateful of your time and the willingness to jump on here and chat with us this morning.
Yeah, guys, anytime, I feel a burgeoning friendship, I look forward to seeing you guys again and connecting more and continuing this work in whatever capacity. We all have, like you said, we all have different gifts and talents to put forward toward this. And like, that's how everything works. Everyone putting their best foot forward, maximizing who we are, and to be the best we can be. And so I'm very grateful for the work you guys have done. You're inspiring a lot of people, and just don't quit.
Thanks, man. It means a lot. And we're definitely gonna have to do a part 2, because I feel like we could talk for hours here. Thank you, Scott, and we'll be in touch, man.
Okay, guys. Right on. Take care.
Thanks.